Volaron la AMIA, igual que en la embajada de Israel. Estoy enfrente de un edificio que está a punto de desplomarse, enfrente de la AMIA, de 8 pisos. Están retirando chicos ensangrentados, mujeres, niños. Quedó destruido, piden ambulancias. Hay gente destrozada, mutilados, escombros por todos lados. La tragedia en Buenos Aires se vuelve a repetir.
Yo no sé a qué hora exacta, o por lo menos no sabía a qué hora exacta esto sucedió. Después, con los datos que uno tiene, 9:53 es un momento, un minuto, el momento de la bomba.
Yo escuché como una explosión de luces, digamos. Se puso todo negro, nos pusimos abajo del escritorio.
Todo esto pasó en 2-3 segundos, como te digo. Escuchamos el boom y cuando empezamos a preguntarnos de qué podría ser ese boom, ya se vino todo abajo. Y yo era parte de lo que se caía.
Yo en ese momento pensé que me había muerto y que, bueno, y que esa era una especie de tránsito que se sentía.
Me voy a relajar, voy a morir en paz, seguramente no hay oxígeno. Me quedé así en esta posición y me dejé llevar tranquilo, relajado.
Y de golpe me encuentro que el agua se queda ahí. Quedó ahí y no podía creer. Digo, bueno, no es para mí, digo, no es para mí todavía.
Había mucho escombro, mucha piedra, mucha destrucción, mucho grito. Gritos de nombres, gritos de dolor, o gritos como mi mamá de que nos llamaba a nosotros y a la vez gritaba de que le dolía a ella lo que le había pasado a ella.
Y en ese momento lo primero que pensé, ya me olvidé de lo que me había pasado a mí, que estaba ahí vivo, y lo primero que pensé es en mi hermano, que estaba en el 4º piso, en la parte de delante del edificio, y esa parte no estaba más, el edificio no existía.
Y vi una montaña de escombros y el brazo del saco azul de mi papá. Y dije, ahí está mi papá, abajo de todos los escombros, sin saber en qué condiciones estaba.
Yo caminé 1 hora y media por todas las calles, desde Tucumán hasta Ayacucho, Piamonte, dando vueltas manzanas, como, no sé, buscando a alguien buscando a mi familia, un lugar de referencia donde decir, estoy viva, ¿qué hago?
Ahí cuando salimos, me senté en el piso y le di de mamar a mi bebé, como un instinto de vida.
Nosotros pusimos sangre, no se nos cayeron ladrillos, se nos cayeron las familias, se nos cayeron los amigos, a mí se les cayeron los empleados, los transeúntes, los vecinos.
En el momento que yo quiero descansar, en algún momento, o por segundos o por minutos, me viene a la memoria cuando quiero tratar de dormir. Y consecuentemente con este pensamiento me sobreviene el otro, el que es el que me agota, que es ¿por qué yo sí y ellos no?
Me tocó estar y me salvé. Y me salvé.
Volaron la AMIA, igual que en la embajada de...
Welcome to the Wilson Center. My name is Benjamin Gadan. I'm a senior advisor to our Latin American program, and I'm the director of our Argentina project. I'm so pleased to have with us today our President, Jane Harman, former Congresswoman, as well as Luis Almagro, the Secretary General of the Organization of American States, members of the Diplomatic Corps, representatives from the Departments of Treasury, Defense, State, congressional staffers, and other distinguished guests. We'd also like to thank all those who are joining us online. and thank all of you for your interest. Before we begin, I want to thank our co-sponsors at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. The images we just saw of the AMIA bombing from July of 1994 resemble the aftermath of an earthquake, with rescuers digging desperately through rubble to find survivors. But the destruction of this Jewish community center in Buenos Aires was not caused by a natural disaster, but rather a suicide bomber who had rammed a van filled with explosives into the building, murdering 85 people, including a 5-year-old, and injuring 300 others. In 2004, Argentina appointed special prosecutors, including Alberto Nisman, to determine who had ordered and arranged this massacre. 2 years later, they delivered their verdict. The highest echelon Iranian government officials were directly responsible for the AMIA attack, they wrote, and instructed the terrorist organization Hezbollah to carry out the operation. In 2007, Interpol issued international arrest warrants, known as red notices, for the bombing suspects, in addition to warrants issued by judges in Argentina. Yet 25 years since the bombing, not one suspect has been arrested or extradited to Argentina to stand trial. Worse still, several of the suspects retain positions of influence in Iran, and they travel freely. 2 of the alleged bombers are currently senior advisors to Iran's supreme leader. Another, who served as defense minister in Iran until 2013, is now president of Iran's Supreme National Defense University. Despite these international and Argentine arrest warrants, the suspects have visited at least 20 countries since the bombing, including China, Russia, Turkey, and even Argentina's neighbor, Bolivia. For 2 decades, annual vigils, including in Argentina and throughout the United States, have kept alive memories of this brutal act of terrorism. The US Congress, for its part, has regularly passed resolutions drawing attention to this tragedy. But despite these and other expressions of solidarity with survivors and victims' relatives, the international community has largely failed to hold accountable the masterminds of the state-sponsored attack against the AMIA. Argentina has done its part. For many, though not all, of these past 25 years, the country, under different political parties and leaders, has courageously stood up to Iran year after year and pleaded for the international community to do the same. Just this month, Argentina's foreign ministry recognized the 25th anniversary of the AMIA bombing by calling the case a cause embraced by the whole Argentine people, who must spare no efforts to shed light on the bombing and to prosecute those responsible. To do our part to answer Argentina's pleading for international assistance and solidarity, we've decided to host today's discussion, to invite the Argentine ambassador, Fernando Risteroa, the State Department's senior counterterrorism coordinator, Ambassador Nathan Sales, and a group of esteemed panelists. I hope you find the conversation valuable. I'd now like to invite Ambassador Risteroa, a good friend of the Wilson Center of the United States, to provide some remarks, followed by our keynote speaker, Ambassador Sales, who serves as Secretary of State Pompeo's senior advisor on counterterrorism issues, and who has worked closely with the Argentine government and other Latin American governments on this critical counterterrorism challenge. Many thanks again for your presence and support.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Benjamin. Pastor entre Tucumán y Villamonte, a neighborhood so familiar to us. Watching this video, this is the kind of thing that we watch via CNN of something, these events happening in somewhere else in the world, never ever imagining that this could happen in Buenos Aires and in the middle of Buenos Aires, where my mother and I would go there frequently. And all these people that you have heard about still are, fortunately, our neighbors. And one of them just said, "Estaba ahí y me salvé." I was there and I was saved. That may be the case for him. It's not the case for all of us. Until we actually find justice, we will not be fully saved. But thank you, Benjamin and the Wilson Center. Thank you, FDD, for inviting me, Argentina, to this very important meeting. one of the several events that we will participate in celebrating this unbelievable, unacceptable anniversary. As you know, on June 24th, the Embassy of Argentina organized a commemorative event at the Hill. We thought it would have to be there because it was the right setting for us to thank all branches of the United States, Congress, Department of State, the White House, the Jewish civil organizations, and also many friends from other embassies, like Israel, that is also here today. And as I said Monday, Argentina has chosen from its very beginning to be both the land and people open and receptive. That specifically includes welcoming those who were persecuted in their places of origin. In a framework of freedom and equality of opportunities, different communities made their contribution to the forming and progress of the Argentine society. Among them, of course, we can count with the Jewish immigration, which made a substantial part in the creation of a plural society based on peaceful and tolerant coexistence, with a great commitment to democratic values. Next July 18th will mark, as we all know, the 25th anniversary of the most brutal attack ever suffered in Argentina's history. The AMIA bombing, 25 years looking for justice, keeping alive the memory of those who lost their lives, those that didn't get a chance to defend themselves. The pain will never cease. The wounds cannot be completely healed, but impunity makes it a lot worse. It is important for the history of Argentina and the entire region, for the history of the Jewish community, that justice has to prevail. That the respect we owe, that is the respect that we owe to the memory of the victims, and it is what makes us stronger to fight against terrorism. The government of Argentina is fully committed to doing justice for the 85 families and hundreds of wounded of this terrorist attack at AMIA. And it will not cease in its objective. And the objective is that all people involved in this attack appear before Argentine courts, be interrogated, and eventually convicted. The Argentine Republic continues to request the Islamic Republic of Iran to cooperate with the Argentine judicial authorities. At the same time, we ask the countries that are friends of Argentina to accompany us in this claim. Avoid receiving or sheltering under diplomatic immunity any of the accused for whom international arrest warrants have been made and red notices have been circulated by Interpol. All the countries in the world are responsible for fighting to eradicate terrorism. Every country in the world is responsible for eradicating anti-Semitism. We must end terror without nuances, without contemplation, without speculation, whether it would be political or economic. We should do it without second thoughts. We cannot live prisoners of terror or to succumb to the contagion. Terrorism is our main enemy, the most cruel, the most coward, the most ruthless, the one that has the largest inhuman dimension. The attack on AMIA made us feel terror, and we were not used to terror. Hatred and destruction became, unfortunately, something that now we had to be aware of. All Argentinians were victims of AMIA. Although the terrorists targeted one of the most important institutions of the Jewish community, an institution that is a co-op that served the community. It was also a blow against democracy and freedom. Terrorism does not discriminate race or religion. Its objective is to destroy everything that opposes its totalitarian beliefs. This 25th anniversary gives us the opportunity to say that to the world that those who want to spread terror will never succeed, because we will not allow the attack to fade into oblivion. Argentina remembers the same way we repudiate any manifestation that denies the Shoah anywhere in the world, the Shoah. As President Macri said more than once, from the very beginning of his first speech in the opening session of Congress, the government will not forget the victims of terrorism. There is no better tribute to the victims of AMIA attack than we search for justice and keep it in our permanent memory. A daily, not an annual, but a daily effort is necessary. I am glad, finally, to have Ambassador Sayes follow my presentation. My government will host next week a second Western Hemisphere Counterterrorism Conference, an opportunity, we believe, to move forward in this combating of hatred and indifference. So thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to begin by saying thank you to the Wilson Center and the Foundation for Defense of Democracies for hosting this important event and inviting me to speak in honor of this sad and solemn occasion. I'm pleased that we're joined by my good friends, the Ambassador of Argentina, Fernando Oriste Roa, as well as Benji Krasna, the Deputy Chief of Mission at the Israeli Embassy here in Washington. Gentlemen, thank you for honoring us with your presence here today. Thank you as well to Miguel Bronfman, AMIA's chief lawyer, who has traveled here to join us on this occasion. Next Thursday, July 18th, will mark 25 years since the Asociación Mutual Israelita Argentina, or AMIA, was bombed in Buenos Aires. I'm here today to speak about the victims, to honor their memory. And I'm also here to speak about the perpetrators and to tell you what we're doing to prevent future atrocities like this one. This bombing was carried out by the Lebanese terrorist group Hezbollah with the full support and direction of Iran. In attacking AMIA, these terrorists targeted not just Argentina, but all of us who call the Western Hemisphere home. We will never forget this attack. And every day we work to ensure that no future attacks like this happen again. That is why, as you've heard, Argentina, in cooperation with the United States, will host a ministerial meeting next week in Buenos Aires to bolster our collective efforts to protect this hemisphere from the scourge of terrorism. The victims of this horrific attack, 85 people were killed and hundreds more were injured, were both native-born Argentines and immigrants. They were Catholic and Jewish, religious and secular. They were intellectuals and workers, doctors and janitors, lawyers and students. They had names. They had families, they had children, and they had friends. They had plans for the future, which for them never came. Let us honor the memories of those who were tragically lost. The youngest AMIA victim, Sebastian Barreiro, was 5. He died holding his mother's hand as they walked in front of the building. The oldest victim, Fievel Pablo Diamant, was 73 and a tailor. Let us remember Martin Figueiro. He was a contractor. He planned to use the money he made working on the AMIA building to take his family on vacation. He left behind a wife and 6 children. 21-year-old Paula Krzyzewski was a law student. She was visiting AMIA for the first time to meet up with her mother. 56-year-old Jacobo Chimanuel was buried in the rubble for 36 hours alongside Martin Cano. Jacobo encouraged Martin to hold on despite the incredible pain he felt. Martin survived, Jacobo did not. The body of 19-year-old Augusto Daniel Jesus was not identified until 2016, the last victim to be named. His mother, Maria Lourdes Jesus, also died in the blast. Let us pause for a moment of silence as we remember these and all the victims of this cowardly attack. The AMIA bombing wasn't Hezbollah's first attack on Argentina. In 1992, Hezbollah bombed the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires, killing 29 people and wounding 242 more. Besides the embassy, a Catholic church, a school, and a home for the elderly were destroyed. Most of the victims were Argentine citizens, and many of them were children. Among the dead was Father Juan Carlos Brumana, who died in the rubble of his church. As Argentina's president, Mauricio Macri, emphasized 2 years ago on the 25th anniversary of the embassy bombing, it is necessary to understand that it was not an attack on the embassy or on Jews, but against Argentina. Indeed, it was. Now, the evidence in both cases points clearly at Hezbollah. But why would a Lebanon-based terror group, which purports to be a defender of Lebanon, attack targets in South America, in Argentina? Argentina hadn't taken any actions against Hezbollah. Argentina hadn't taken any actions that harmed Lebanon. The reason, of course, is that the group's patron, Iran, wanted to attack Argentina. And that was all that was needed. Secretary Pompeo recently emphasized that Iran is the world's largest state sponsor of terror. That was true in 1994, and it's still true now. The leaders in Tehran endorsed the AMIA attack. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, provided the funding and the logistical support. And Hezbollah, long the IRGC's most deadly and capable proxy, carried out the operation. We have joined President Macri and the Argentine government in seeking justice for the victims of the AMIA attack and their families. Iran has a responsibility to repudiate terrorism and cooperate fully with Argentine authorities in this investigation. 25 years later, we're still waiting. There are still 6 international arrest warrants, Interpol red notices, that are outstanding. These are based on criminal charges filed in Argentina, and they concern the arrest of the Iranians and Hezbollah members who are suspected of participating in the AMIA attack. These include several senior Iranian officials: Ahmed Vahidi, the former IRGC Quds Force commander and defense minister; Mohsen Rezai, the former commander of the IRGC; and Ali Falahian, Iran's former minister of intelligence. There are also arrest warrants outstanding for Mohsen Rabbani and Ahmad Ashari, who served at Iran's embassy in Buenos Aires, as well as for Hezbollah operative Samuel Salman al-Raida. It's also appropriate today to reflect on prosecutor Alberto Nisman's heroic efforts to investigate the AMIA bombing. In 2004, Nisman took over an investigation that had been plagued by mismanagement and corruption. He pursued the case doggedly and tenaciously over the next 11 years in an effort to get to the bottom of this deadly attack. Nisman faced obstacles at every turn. He received death threats against himself as well as his children. He was undaunted in his pursuit of the truth up to the day he was murdered in 2015. We continue to stress the importance of resolving the circumstances of his tragic death and bringing to justice the perpetrators of the AMIA bombing that Nisman so assiduously investigated. It's been a quarter of a century since the AMIA bombing, yet the threats from Iran, the IRGC, and Hezbollah remain undiminished. The regime in Tehran continues to provide hundreds of millions of dollars every year to terrorists around the world. It has provided Hezbollah alone some $700 million a year. It does this despite the ongoing economic turmoil that's impoverishing many of its people. Tehran's priorities are clear. It doesn't seek to boost economic growth at home or to reduce Iran's growing unemployment. What the regime prioritizes is buying guns and bombs to export terror. We've talked about Hezbollah plots in Argentina in the 1990s, but this is far from a historical matter because Hezbollah continues to have our hemisphere squarely in its sights today. One of Hezbollah's highest placed collaborators in the region has been Tariq el-Assami, former vice president under the Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro. When he was head of Venezuela's passport agency, he was suspected of providing Venezuelan passports to Hezbollah operatives. Hezbollah's propaganda machine now touts him as a possible successor to Maduro, calling him a strong man in the shadows and a close friend of the Lebanese resistance and the Syrian regime of Bashar al-Assad. Apparently they meant that as a compliment. Well, this administration doesn't see it that way. In 2017, the Treasury Department listed el-Assami as a specially designated narcotics trafficker under the Kingpin Act. Another example is Mohammed Hamdar, an alleged Hezbollah member who was arrested in 2014 and is currently on trial in Peru on terrorism charges. Assad Ahmad Barakat, a key Hezbollah financer, is now sitting in jail in Brazil, awaiting extradition to Paraguay on several criminal charges. Then there's Nader Farhat, a Hezbollah supporter who was recently extradited from Paraguay to the United States to face federal money laundering charges in Florida. More broadly, the tri-border area of Argentina, Paraguay, and Brazil continues to be a node of Hezbollah activity. For decades, Hezbollah has taken advantage of the loosely regulated region to raise money and plan possible attacks. We assess that some of the planning for the AMIA bombing took place there. Hezbollah is also active right here in the United States. In 2017, the FBI arrested 2 Hezbollah operatives, Samir al-Debek and Ali Karani, in Michigan and New York, respectively. Al-Debek allegedly was surveilling potential targets at Hezbollah's direction in Panama, including the Panama Canal. Karani spent years surveilling military and law enforcement facilities in the U.S. He was just convicted by a jury in New York for his crimes. Indeed, Hezbollah and its Iranian patron spread terrorism across the globe, from attacks against our diplomatic facilities in Iraq to terror plotting in African countries such as Kenya and Nigeria, from plots against Gulf neighbors to planning bombings and assassinations in the heart of Western Europe. No place is safe from Iran's malevolent reach. Hezbollah has financiers, operatives, front companies, and other assets in Lebanon, in the Gulf, in Africa, in Asia, and here in the Western Hemisphere. In recent years, Hezbollah operatives have been caught preparing attacks as far afield as Azerbaijan, Bolivia, Cyprus, Egypt, Peru, and Thailand. Its weapons caches have been discovered in the Gulf, in Europe, in Asia, and in Africa. Hezbollah likes to masquerade as a defender of the Lebanese people, but these actions reveal its true agenda: global terrorism. In 2012, Hezbollah bombed a bus in Bulgaria, killing 5 Israeli tourists as well as their Bulgarian driver. That attack took place as well on July 18th. And so Argentina and Bulgaria are now joined together in sharing a bloody anniversary. As we remember the victims of this deadly plot, we also call on Bulgaria to complete the trial of the Hezbollah members charged in absentia, consistent with its domestic law. Let me tell you now what the administration is doing to crack down on Hezbollah and other Iran-backed terrorists, both around the globe and here in our own hemisphere. Under the leadership of President Trump, we've intensified our counterterrorism efforts against Iran, the IRGC, and Hezbollah worldwide. Most notably, in April, Secretary Pompeo took the unprecedented step of designating the IRGC as a foreign terrorist organization, or an FTO. And that designation concerned the entire IRGC, including its Quds Force. This was the first time the United States has ever designated part of another government as an FTO. And the US government now formally acknowledges the reality that the IRGC doesn't just finance and promote terrorism, it actively engages in terrorism as a tool of statecraft. To counter Hezbollah, we're using law enforcement and financial tools to disrupt its networks. We're targeting its financial resources and squeezing it out of the international financial system. We're hitting it in the wallet and will deny it the funds it needs to commit terrorism around the world. The U.S. government has designated over 150 entities and individuals with ties to Hezbollah, including more than 50 just since last year. The State Department's Rewards for Justice program recently offered up to $10 million for information leading to the disruption of Hezbollah's financial mechanisms. This was the first time we've ever issued an RFJ reward focused solely on Hezbollah financing. It was an important step in our maximum pressure campaign against Tehran and its terrorist proxies. In 2017, the State Department issued RFJ offers for 2 Hezbollah leaders with American blood on their hands, Talal Hamia and Fawad Shukr. Shukr is a senior military commander who played a central role in Hezbollah's 1993 bombing of the U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut, killing 241 American service members. Hamia is the head of Hezbollah's external security organization, their global terrorist arm, which is responsible for the group's campaign of terrorism across the globe. These were the first RFJs targeting Hezbollah in more than a decade. We've also sanctioned Jawad Nasrallah as a specially designated global terrorist. Jawad Nasrallah is the son of Hezbollah's Secretary General and a Hezbollah leader in his own right. And in recent weeks, the U.S. has designated Hezbollah's security and intelligence chiefs, along with 2 Hezbollah members of the Lebanese parliament. Our sanctions are starving Iran, the IRGC, and Hezbollah of the money they need to promote terrorism worldwide. This administration is using every tool at our disposal to dismantle Hezbollah's global financial network, including its participation in drug trafficking and other crimes. The good news, Hezbollah is feeling the pinch. As our sanctions on the Iranian regime have taken hold, Hezbollah has had to tighten its belt. The group's Secretary General is now publicly asking for donations. The resistance needs your support, he has said. We will continue to increase the financial pressure and impose costs on the Iranian regime and its terrorist proxies until they abandon their malign and outlaw behavior. In this hemisphere, we're actively working with our partners to counter Iranian and Hezbollah terrorism. We're partnering with key multilateral players like the Organization of American States and the 15-member Caribbean Community, or CARICOM. We also have robust bilateral counterterrorism cooperation throughout the region, including with countries such as Argentina, Panama, Paraguay, Brazil, Peru, and Colombia. Next week, we will intensify these efforts at a counterterrorism ministerial meeting held in Buenos Aires, a follow-up to a similar session that we hosted here in Washington last December. We applaud President Macri and his administration for their leadership in hosting this meeting. President Macri well knows the costs of Iran-backed terrorism. He has courageously renewed Argentina's resolve to never suffer another attack, and he is determined to reopen the investigations of the 1992 and 1994 bombings and to bring the perpetrators to justice. Impunity must end. In Buenos Aires, we'll discuss how to bolster our counterterrorism capabilities and work together to build partnerships, to strengthen security, and to eliminate gaps. We'll continue to seek ways to block terrorist travel and cut off the flow of money to these groups. And we'll discuss the need to attack the nexus between transnational crime and terrorism. We'll also be making some additional announcements in Buenos Aires, so stay tuned. One of the lessons from the Argentina bombings a quarter century ago is that no country is safe from terrorism. And so we all have a stake in ridding the world of this scourge. The only way we can secure ourselves, the only way we can prevent mourning more victims like Sebastian Barreiro, Paolo Krzyzewski, and Father Brumana is by cooperating closely, working together for our joint security, and by facing the terrorist threat openly and honestly. Thank you all.
Wow. First, thank you very much for those poignant remarks and for being with us today, Ambassador Aristaroa. And also thank you to Ambassador Sales for that most powerful global tour of Iran and Hezbollah's malign activities, but also what we're doing about it. 25 years later, we can do something about it, and thank you for sharing that with us. I also want to add my welcome to the many ambassadors and diplomats from Latin America and elsewhere who are here today, and I want to especially welcome Benjamin Krasna, Deputy Chief of Mission of the Embassy of Israel. As Ambassador Sales noted, not only was the AMIA Jewish Community Center bombed by Iran-backed Hezbollah, this was actually the second attack, right? The attack on the Embassy of Israel in 1992, in which 29 people were killed, 242 others were injured. Both events, as was stated, were attacks on Argentina. Both must be regarded as anti-Semitic attacks, and both call out for ensuring justice for their victims and holding accountable those responsible. A warm welcome to you and to all those joining us here today. And I also want to welcome all those who are here on live stream. And a warm welcome to our panelists. Miguel Bronfman is an Argentine lawyer based in Argentina, specializing in criminal and international law and human rights. In 1998, he started to work on the criminal proceedings for the attacks on the AMIA, and since 2008, he has led the legal team that represents the AMIA on every single judicial-related matter. Miguel traveled all the way from Argentina to be with us here today, so thank you so much for coming, and I know you're leaving after this to join the ministerial meetings back in Argentina. The Honorable Daniel Glazer is a principal with the Financial Integrity Network. Danny previously served for some 20 years, was it, Danny, at the Department of Treasury, most recently as Assistant Secretary for Terrorist Financing and Financial Crimes. He was also head of the delegation of the U.S. delegation for the Financial Action Task Force. My colleague, Emmanuel Ottolenghi, is a senior fellow at FDD and an expert at FDD's Center on Economic and Financial Power. His research specializes on Hezbollah's illicit threat networks in Latin America, especially in the tri-border area, and Iran's use of sanctions evasion. He's been a great resource both for government and law enforcement. And thank you, Emmanuel, for being here. Miguel, I'm going to start with you. You have worked on legal matters on behalf of the AMIA for some 20 years. I think nobody really knows the AMIA case better than you do. In fact, you compiled a book on it that just last night we posted to albertonisman.org if you're interested in looking at the tremendous number of documents associated with the case. Now, many people know that Interpol issued the red notices. We've talked about it here today. But tell us just very briefly, what is the strongest evidence you have? What's the core evidence tying Iran and Hezbollah to the AMIA case?
Sure, okay. Well, thank you, Toby. I'd just like to take a minute. I'm here on behalf of AMIA, so I'd like to thank you all for coming here. I know you have very busy schedules in Washington, D.C., and you make time to come here, so yeah, for us it's very important. And thank you, Toby and Benjamin, for this event. For us it's very important to have our voice heard here. As for your question, the answer could be very long. Unlike ordinary crime, a terrorist act is a very complex crime. So you can build the case by putting together many pieces of evidence. It's not just 1, 2, or 3. You have to really make an ensemble of different pieces of evidence. And in the 90s, in Buenos Aires, the list of possible suspects that would carry such an attack was very short. Today, terrorism has taken many different forms and has attacked in many different places, but back then, the suspect list was really short. So the truth is, even though the international arrest warrants and the red notices are from 2007, both Iran and Hezbollah has been in the case from day one. In fact, the first judge in charge of the case issued a resolution only 2 weeks after the attack saying Hezbollah and Iran are behind this attack. Both Iran and Hezbollah had motives to carry on this attack, different motives, but came together. On the case of Iran, the sudden cancellation by the Argentine government of the nuclear contracts that were in effect since the late 80s. And in the case of Hezbollah, Israel had arrested one of its leaders just 40 days before that, and Hassan Nasrallah, Hezbollah chief, publicly said, while claiming vengeance, he said, "Our arms are long. If not, see what happened in Argentina 2 years ago." He was talking about, of course, the Israeli embassy bombing in 1992, which in turn had taken place because Israel had killed the chief of Hezbollah back then, Abbas Mousawi. Iran had a structure of intelligence and espionage in Argentina through the diplomatic officials. Hezbollah had the financial and logistical support needed through the three-border area. And I know one thing is to know who did it, and the other thing is to prove who did it. So this is the information as regarding who did it. And along the years, all the evidence very slowly, because in the 90s, the information, for example, to get the traveling information about a person would take much longer than it could take these days. So slowly, all the information was gathered in the file, and now we are sure about who, where, and when took the decision to carry on the attack, why, which were the motives, which were the reasons, who was responsible for carrying out the attack, Hezbollah, who was the driver, the suicide driver that drove the car bomb against the AMIA building and made the explosion. He was a Lebanese person, his name Ibrahim Berro, belonged to a family in Lebanon very active in Hezbollah. He had two brothers who had also immolated in terrorist attacks. We know exactly when the operational group entered the country, July 18, and when they exited the country, July 18. So there's a lot of evidence that really supports these accusations.
Great. And I think 25 years later, a lot of people may think that the case, you know, frankly, is dormant. If you could just take a couple of minutes and tell us what is the status of the AMIA case from a legal perspective, right? There are three separate cases. One is the original case having to do with the bombing itself. And then, of course, there's the case about the attempted cover-up of Iran's role in the 1994 bombing. And then, of course, as was mentioned earlier, there is the investigation into the assassination of Alberto Nisman. I'm sure there are other parts of these things. But take a moment to just tell us what's the status of the case today. And if you don't mind also addressing briefly the Interpol red notices. What's the status of those?
Okay. The red notices are in full effect. Despite Iran's efforts along these years, Interpol has renovated the red notices every time. So now they are in full effect. That's why we complain when we know that one of the accused Iranians travel outside their country and they are not arrested, because they should be arrested. So that's the last part of your question. The case has several different fronts. On the main investigation, which is still open, and we have new prosecutors after Alberto Nisman's assassination in office, and we are not happy with the work. We have been saying this publicly. We understand it's difficult to be in charge of a case that's been going on for so long, but still we would like to see more activity on the new prosecutors, and we are complaining about that, and we are going to use all the attention we're going to get this next week to put the focus on that. The main investigation is related to Iran and Hezbollah, although we know a lot of information, as I just had as I just said. There are still many things that we don't know and we want to know. And also, we are convinced, we have always been convinced, there was a local connection in the plot, in the bombing. One of the people with an international arrest warrant and red notice is a Lebanese citizen, El Reda, and El Reda was married to an Argentine woman who, as we know, is living with him in Lebanon. So there were also involvement in the handling of the van that was used as the car bomb by probably police officers, corrupted police officers in the early 90s was a common day thing in Argentina. And all those things still need to be fully investigated. There were some attempts, they failed, and we're still pushing and fighting for the prosecutors to retake the case again seriously enough. You asked me about the trial for the cover-up. Well, this is the outcome of Alberto Nisman's complaint, the complaint that cost him his life. As I'm sure you all know, he claimed that the former president and a group of former officials had made a deal with Iran regarding the AMIA case in order to cover up the Iranians, to help them lift the red notices, and in exchange of commercial favors or trades. Well, at the beginning, they tried to shut down the investigation. After a couple of years, the investigation was finally reopened, and now the former president has to is waiting, in fact, for the trial to begin. She's accused of cover-up and treason, very serious crimes. Now, this is an election day, and I'm sure you also know she's a candidate for vice president. So, as it works in Argentina, most probably the court will wait to see what happens in the elections, and then they will decide if the trial starts this year or never, according to the results of the elections. And about Alberto Nisman, well, we are still very worried about that. That was, I have no words to describe how we felt when we knew the federal prosecutor in charge of the AMIA case had been murdered. We knew he had been murdered from minute one. Thankfully, the investigations that followed, it took some time, but have confirmed that he was, in fact, assassinated, and that he was assassinated because of his work as the federal prosecutor of the AMIA case. That has been stated in court, judicially, not only by the first instance prosecutor and judge, by the Court of Appeals, and even by the Supreme Court. But that's not enough, of course. We need the crime to be fully solved. We need to know who ordered the assassination, who did it, and exactly why. It's not enough to say because of the AMIA case. We need to know why, what was behind, or what was the prosecutor after that gave place to such a horrendous thing. So we are still pushing. It's Prosecutor Tayano, the one who's in charge of the investigation. And we would like for him, if he doesn't have enough resources, that he asks for them. If he is not receiving collaboration, then he should denounce it. We are not satisfied when what we see is silence. We need more answers. Everybody, the whole country needs answers about that.
I mean, every couple of weeks I see another piece of evidence emerging from the case, phone records, and all kinds of things. And thanks for the update. I know it's a very quick update because these cases are rich, but they are ongoing and they're worthy of our continued attention. We may come back to some of those details, but I want to turn to Emmanuel. Emmanuel, you spent a lot of time looking at the tri-border area, Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay. And the TBA, as Ambassador Sales mentioned, was very important in terms of logistics, planning, and financing of the AMIA bombing. Back in 2004 and 2006, the Treasury Department designated Hezbollah financiers associated with that. How would you define the threat in the TBA today, many years later?
Thank you, Toby, and thanks to the Wilson Center for having us here together for this event. Some people think that I focus too much on the TBA. Certainly in some of the countries contiguous to the TBA, and perhaps it's that's part of the real problem in the TBA, in the tri-border area, because despite the fact that Hezbollah has had a well-documented, robust presence for more than 3 decades now, there is a lack of recognition of this reality. It is often downplayed, and when we have evidence of financial crimes such as contraband, smuggling, money laundering, arms trafficking, drug trafficking, and significant crimes connected to currency manipulation, exchange, movement on currency across the borders without declarations, violation of banking regulations, and so on, it's often dismissed as simply being tax evasion or just something attributable to the general lawlessness of the area. What to me is significant, and what drew my attention to focusing on the TBA very much ever since FTD started my project looking at Iran and Hezbollah in Latin America, is the fact that when you go to the TBA, as you can also do in a handful of other locations in Latin America, what you find is a miniature reproduction of the entire Hezbollah social welfare apparatus of control and indoctrination of the Shia community in Lebanon. You find mosques, schools, youth movements, charitable organizations that are not just there to serve a numerous Shia Lebanese community, which is present there, has been for a long time, has been very much part of the fabric of the frontier society of the TBA, but the values inculcated to the kids in the schools, which are named as Brazilian Lebanese or Paraguayan Lebanese, but are really Shia Lebanese under the control of the Al-Mahdi school network of Hezbollah. The values inculcated are the ones of Hezbollah. The clerics are Hezbollah clerics. Treasury in 2010 actually designated a Shia cleric inside the mosque, the Mesquita do Brás, the largest Shia mosque in Latin America, in São Paulo, Brazil, as the Hezbollah chief representative in Latin America. This cleric is very close to all the clerics in the other Shia mosques in the region. He's, until recently, been traveling around, keeping contacts and building networks. So whenever you see this kind of investment, that is a sign that Hezbollah values enough the community they're targeting to ensure that over decades, the Shia Lebanese there maintain a level of loyalty and connection to Hezbollah in Lebanon. And we have it on record from Treasury in the designations from 2004 and 2006 that actually some of the Hezbollah financiers targeted were in charge of ensuring that those business people, member of the community, who did not want to toe the line and align themselves and acquiesce to this type of situation would be extorted, threatened, and pressured to conform and to align. And so I think that when you take that into account, that is already an important sign. And it is consistent with the strategy that both Hezbollah and Iran have had in Latin America of using religious institutions, cultural centers, as a facade to deploy and to establish a presence, to spread influence, to gain support, to build alliances with local political movements. Now, the second point is that, of course, as I was saying initially, the tri-border area remains a hub of illicit trade. If trade-based money laundering and illicit finance had some sort of a heat print from out of space, the tri-border area would glow red in a way that very few other places in the world would do. And it's rightfully so, because despite the popularization of the location by recent Netflix productions, suggesting that it is a kind of remote dirt road area in the jungle, like mullahs in the jungle with bomb depots hiding. The tri-border area is very much first world. It's a large metropolitan area of combined 1 million residents, more or less. It has the largest or second largest by size hydroelectric dam in the world, first largest one in terms of electric production, which brings tens of thousands of middle-class professionals, educated professionals, to live in the area from both sides of the border, Paraguay and Brazil. It has the second largest waterfalls in the world, UNESCO heritage location, the Iguazu Falls, which draws a tourist industry. It has a free trade zone in Paraguay, which of course brings shoppers. So it has 3 airports that can land B-747. The Brazilian airport alone handles 4.5 million people a year. So it is a place with 3 currencies, 3 languages, 3 jurisdictions, and porous borders, weak controls, and corrupt institutions that allows for an incredible amount of flow of money. The Federal Police of Brazil established in 2017 that the average value of the illicit economy in the TBA alone is $18 billion a year. So it is a mecca for money laundering. And money laundering and Hezbollah in the same place means terror finance.
So you talked about porous borders, and that's why that's one reason that it's sort of a ripe area for organized crime. Can you talk just very briefly, what are the tactics that Hezbollah uses in the tri-border area? What does the financial infrastructure look like?
So again, for anyone who's visited, what's striking is that you kind of expect, reading about it, to find a lawless place, but actually it's a relatively friendly area, especially the commercial zone in Ciudad del Este on the Paraguayan side. Now, the first problem is, of course, there is only one bridge connecting Brazil and Paraguay. There is an average of 100,000 people crossing that bridge on a daily basis. One of the reasons is that as soon as you cross the bridge, you don't even need to travel from the bridge to the commercial zone. It's right there. And it's a shopping mecca. On Black Friday, you can buy an iPhone for $450. You can buy Ralph Lauren polo shirts for $40. If you don't want to pay Netflix, Amazon Prime, or HBO a subscription, you can buy a scrambler for $130 produced legally in Brazil, but low priced in Paraguay, which you can then connect to your internet, and you can watch TV for free. Now, the phone you buy, I'm not sure is authentic. More likely won't. The polo shirts have been produced in a sweatshop using illegal immigrants or overworked, underpaid workers somewhere else in Latin America, and then it has been shipped by contraband across the Andes, and so on. And so the entire tri-border economy, especially on the Paraguayan side, relies on these incredible price differentials, which is visible across the entire range of products. Now, what is the role of Hezbollah financiers there? The role is to both manage an enormous volume of trade, both fake and authentic. A lot of merchandise comes, but a lot of false invoicing is generated just to move value. And the movement of value is put to the service of criminal activities. Now, Paraguay increasingly has become, over the years, a transit point for Andean cocaine coming from Bolivia and Peru, and increasingly from Colombia. First of all, to the local Brazilian market, which is exploding as a cocaine consumer, but also then to be shipped on to Europe, through Africa, to the United States, and even beyond. And so the presence of these incredibly efficient, well-oiled trade-based money laundering machine allows for ill-gotten gains from crime to be quickly and efficiently laundered. And the community is there to do it through trade-based money laundering, through control of money exchange houses, and pretty much the entire range of endeavors that is needed. Now, why is this so important for the United States? I think national security, not just for the region, for two reasons. The first is that actually when you look at these trade-based money laundering operations, the vast majority of them goes through the United States. They buy merchandise, or they pretend to buy merchandise in China, through Hong Kong, but then they have intermediate companies mostly located in Miami. Now, one would say, why would Hezbollah take the risk of being caught in the United States when they can just ship through China, from China directly to Latin America? And the answer is that criminals and terrorists and everybody else wants access to the gold standard of the financial system and want to dollarize its ill-gotten gains. So that is the first. And the second, just to conclude, is this, and this relates to the AMIA. When we fight terrorism, we are often thinking that we're fighting people, hiding in the shadows, conspiring to blow up buildings and people. To blow up buildings and people, especially when you talk about a non-state actor as Hezbollah, you actually need a whole complex range of logistical support and procurement to carry out the terror attacks. And Ambassador Sales mentioned before Cyprus, London, which was recently in the news because of a warehouse where 3 tons of ammonium nitrate hidden in ice packs was found and related to a Hezbollah plot. Well, you can't walk into the CVS pharmacy on DuPont Circle and buy 3 tons of ice pack from first aid kits without raising suspicion. What you need is a legitimate company that does import-export of medical supplies, that will buy that and will provide it to then those who will have the technical expertise to carry out the terror attack. That's what happened with the AMIA. That's what happens usually with these terror attacks. And therefore, these economic infrastructures, which are used most of the time to launder money and raise funds for terror finance, can also be activated for the procurement of explosives that can be used in future attacks.
And real quick answer, you keep talking about the gains that accrue to Hezbollah. Is it possible to quantify them real briefly?
So it's very difficult to quantify an illicit economy. There are estimates, which we've heard, 700 million a year from Iran, and then it's assumed that Hezbollah raises $300 million a year on its own through a variety of other activities. When I look at the value of single operations that have been exposed through sanctions and by prosecutions in the United States, take the Ayman Juma case with the Lebanese Canadian bank, where $200 million a month were being laundered through one single network. And we know that Hezbollah usually takes from a range of about 10 to 20% commission on these types of operations. And when I look at the size of the illicit economy of the TBA alone, $18 billion a year, as I mentioned, according to the Federal Police of Brazil, my assumption is we're talking way up above $1 billion a year in money raised through illicit activities alone.
Mm-hmm. Danny, we're going to get you in just one second. I don't want to leave Latin America just yet. In a second, we're going to zoom out and look at Hezbollah outside of the region. But Miguel, I just wanted to come back to you and just summarize what are the key sort of lessons learned from the attacks and what things still need to be done inside Argentina, in the fight against terrorism, real briefly.
Yes, thank you, Tori. Well, there have been many lessons. The first and most painful is that terrorism can hit everywhere, which in the early 90s was not so well assumed. And that's why the first years of the investigations were quite solitary for the investigators and the Jewish community. Then different attacks around the world took place, and they started to look back at what had happened in Argentina in a different way. So that was one of the first lessons. Another lesson is that Hezbollah is very present in the region as well as Iran. There was an indictment in 2013 in the case that showed and unfolded all the ways that Iran had infiltrated the whole country. I think that's why all the work on Hezbollah in the three-border area is very important and crucial. And specifically related to the AMIA case and to Argentina, there are several things that still need to be improved. I'm talking about modern legislation. The first judge always complained that he had to investigate this case, which was so complex, with the same tools that he had to investigate an everyday crime. And nothing has changed on that respect. We still have the same, which was already old, we still have the same old criminal procedures code from the late, early 90s. We need a new anti-terrorist legislation. All the countries that had suffered terrorism have updated and modernized their legislation. Argentina has not. We need more training for the security forces, for sure. We need a way that the intelligence services can coordinate. That was very clear along the investigation, that the different intelligence units in the country that were operating, they were either operating for their own benefit, their own purpose, or for different motives, but they were never operating in a coordinated way, and that's crucial, because those are the people and the agencies who are going to move the investigation forward. It's not the judge, it's not the prosecutor. The judge and the prosecutor just received information that these agencies can bring them. So if they're not working in a coordinated way, the result will be what we had in the AMIA case, a very long and slow and painful investigation.
Great, thanks. So understandably, we've talked a lot about Latin America, but Danny, you have spent 20 years looking at Hezbollah issues and Hezbollah funding streams. Ambassador Sales gave us a great tour. What I want to know is many terrorist organizations are getting savvy. They're covering their tracks. They're using new techniques and technologies, in addition, of course, to the traditional ways that they raise money. How does Hezbollah fit into this picture?
Well, thanks, Toby. And first of all, I'll just say really quickly, thank you to FDD and to the Wilson Center for inviting me. It's an honor to be here, and it's an honor to be with this distinguished panel. This is a fun topic for me to talk about. It's a sad and tragic topic, but it's heartening to see all these people here who are interested in this and who care so much about this issue. With respect to Hezbollah globally, when you think about its sort of economic and financial wealth, there's really you could divide into lots of different smaller categories, but I think you could divide into two major categories: the money it gets directly from Iran, and everything else. And it clearly gets hundreds of millions of dollars annually from Iran. I think Emmanuel said the number is 700 million. I'm not up to date on the most recent numbers, but it's hundreds of millions of dollars for sure annually from Iran. And I do believe that's the primary source of wealth for Hezbollah, and that everything else it gets is all nice to have money. But if to be serious about thinking about Hezbollah financing, it really does need to begin with the money that it receives directly in cash from Iran, and then you get to Hezbollah Inc., which is just Hezbollah is a multinational corporation that has financial interests around the world, that engages in many different activities, some sort of legal, some illegal, and it's got a lot of quite unsavory people that are affiliated with it in a variety of ways, including many people in the tri-border area, including people, as Ambassador Sales mentioned, in Venezuela. I actually think that Hezbollah is much more integrated in the Western Hemisphere than people realize, and that's commonly talked about. It seems anytime we look somewhere, we find Hezbollah in the Western Hemisphere, but it's like this sort of like big map of the Western Hemisphere that's completely dark, and then you shine a flashlight on it, and where you shine the flashlight, you see Hezbollah, and you say, "Oh, look, there's a Hezbollah center." But then it turns out you shine your flashlight somewhere else. Sao Paulo, you mentioned, oh, look, there's Hezbollah. You shine your flashlight on narcotics trafficking organization. Oh, look, there's Hezbollah. I think that if we like sort of turn the lights on completely, we would see Hezbollah is quite integrated in the Western Hemisphere, and is even in the United States. My good friend and former colleague at Treasury Department, Matt Levitt, speaks and has written quite extensively on Hezbollah fundraising that occurs right here in the United States. So, you know, the tri-border area is an important place, but Hezbollah Inc. exists worldwide. In terms of sort of strategies that we've deployed to try to address this, and a lot of it was discussed by Ambassador Salles earlier. You know, I think going back, and especially after the bombings in Argentina, there was an intense focus on looking at sort of the far-flung Hezbollah financial networks and the financial networks that support them here in the Western Hemisphere and in the tri-border area and other places. And that was important work, and that work was work that continued through the Bush administration and to the Obama administration. And it was work that focused in the Western Hemisphere. It was work that focused in West Africa and in other places. But we came to a conclusion, and this is going to be slightly at odds with what Emmanuel said, but I don't think it's too much at odds with it. We came to a conclusion somewhere, I don't know, somewhere in like 2011, 2012, that going after Hezbollah sort of on the periphery was going to be was nice to do and important to do in terms of disrupting their capabilities around the world, but that if we really wanted to send a message to Hezbollah that we were going after them in a strategic way, that we were going after them in a way that was going to damage their ability to operate, we needed to do two things. We needed to target Iran and target the ability of Iran to supply Hezbollah, and we needed to challenge Hezbollah in Beirut. We needed to show them that we could make their life uncomfortable in Beirut, in the Lebanese financial system. And look, Hezbollah is really, really scary. If I lived in Lebanon, I'd be scared of Hezbollah. But the U.S. Treasury Department's kind of scary also when you're in the international financial system, and there was an opportunity to sort of put your finger on the scale a little bit. No one thought we were going to uproot Hezbollah from South Lebanon, but we did think that we could send a message that we were prepared to challenge them in the Lebanese financial system in Beirut. And then it's been mentioned the Lebanese Canadian Bank and various actions that were taken and various actions that Congress took around that time to really make it much harder for Hezbollah to engage in financial activity, and then even the most recent designations by the U.S. government on the Hezbollah parliamentarians. Again, all of that goes to unsettling Hezbollah where it thought it could feel comfortable, and that's good. That's an absolutely vital part of any financial campaign against Hezbollah. They're going to continue to get money from Iran. We're not going to bankrupt Hezbollah, but we could make it costlier, riskier, less efficient, and we could make them feel uncomfortable. We could make them feel that there is no place for them to hide, and that's been the frankly the consistent financial strategy against Hezbollah from over the past 10 years and up until today. So it was very gratifying for me to hear some of the things that Ambassador Salles was saying, and I really do think that unfortunately it's a target-rich environment, but that also creates lots of opportunities to continue to put them on their heels and to continue to be part of what needs to be an overall effort, all of government effort to defeat Hezbollah.
So I want to put this question to whichever panelists want to answer it. I'd be remiss if I didn't address the story that's so pervasive in the Argentine press this morning, which is that Argentina may issue this week, some reports say even Thursday, may issue something akin to an executive order designating Hezbollah as a terrorist entity in the exact same way that the United States designates Hezbollah, in the exact same way that other countries around the world, some other countries around the world, designate Hezbollah. Now, Argentina doesn't have a kind of a terrorism list right now, and so whatever mechanism they may need to use to do this, we'll see what that is. But talk to me about what the impact of this is. How important is it? Amanda, you'll probably want to say something, so I'm going to start with you first. I have just volunteered you.
Thank you. Yes, I do want to say something. First of all, with the caveat that it hasn't happened yet, and we understand that this step still has to face some internal hurdles. Perhaps it's something extremely commendable that should be welcomed, applauded, supported. That Argentina is taking the lead on. You can't begin to solve a problem and as long as and until you actually recognizing, and you're recognizing it by calling it by its name, and that's been part of the problem in Latin America. There is, for a variety of reasons, local, political, historical, and so on, a reluctance to call and recognize Hezbollah, and also legal, by the way, to recognize Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. And so the fact that Argentina, on the 25th anniversary of the AMIA, is getting ready, hopefully, to do that is very important, and it shows the way for other countries. And again, Ambassador Sales mentioned the fact that other countries in the region, allies, have been supportive of the effort to combat Hezbollah, to go after Hezbollah networks. He mentioned the arrest in September of last year of Asad Ahmed Barakat in Foz do Iguaçu on the Brazilian side of the TBA. He mentioned the fact that Nader Farhat, whom he called as Hezbollah supporter, and I'm glad that the U.S. government is openly naming him as a Hezbollah supporter, has been extradited from Paraguay. And I want to commend the former government of Paraguay, led by former President Cortés, under whose watch he was arrested. And I want to commend the prosecutors and the judicial system for ensuring that all of the outside influences and efforts to torpedo the extradition process failed, and he's now safely in the jail at the courthouse in Miami. But we need, moving forward, to have local governments call a spade, say Hezbollah is a terrorist organization, one, and two, they need to invest more and work for a situation where when they arrest Hezbollah financiers, not just at our behest, but because they themselves have the courage and the ability to build up these cases, they can actually carry out justice in their own countries. I mean, we are in a situation now where you have governments who in the past were reluctant to do so, who are now willing to extradite Hezbollah financiers to face justice in the United States. I would like to see, and maybe this is a long-term project, both Paraguay and Brazil recognize, just like Argentina seems poised to do, that Hezbollah is a terrorist organization, create the legal framework, and also empower prosecutors and judges and investigators, law enforcement agencies, with resources, capacity, know-how, instruments, and knowledge to go after Hezbollah down there.
I'll just very quickly add to that. I agree with everything Emmanuel said. I think there's a reluctance in a lot of countries and in a lot of communities to call an organization a terrorist organization that also does other things. So if it's a terrorist organization, but it's also a political party, or if it's a terrorist organization, it's also a social movement, or it also provides social services, or it also has a seat in government, then there's a reluctance to call it a terrorist organization. I actually think the United States gets it right. If it's an organization that engages in terrorist activities, then it's a terrorist organization through and through, and it doesn't matter about the other things that it does. We have to understand that it may be providing important services and address that issue, but it doesn't matter what it does. If it engages in terrorist activities, it is a terrorist organization, 100%. And I think it's important that Argentina is taking this action. I think other countries should take this action. And I think the countries, particularly the European countries that have designated the quote-unquote military wing of Hezbollah as a terrorist organization, need to designate Hezbollah as a whole as a terrorist organization, because there's no such thing as the military wing of I've had so many conversations with friends in Europe. What exactly is the military wing of terrorism? Nasrallah himself says he doesn't understand what the military wing of Hezbollah is, that there is no such thing. we need to understand that these groups, this is what they are, and we need to identify them as such, and we need to treat them as such, from A to Z.
Audience, we're going to get to questions in just a second, so start thinking about what you want to ask our panelists. But before we do that, let me invite you, Miguel, to address that.
On this last topic, yes, I totally agree. And in fact, following with which Danny had just said, I'm a bit concerned because I received some rumors, let's say, this morning from Argentina that the government is about to finish the decree ordering a register for terrorist organizations. That will be first step. The second one would be related to Hezbollah, and apparently, they are considering designating just the military branch,
which doesn't exist.
Which it doesn't exist, exactly, and it would be, in my view, completely useless. So, hopefully, someone is going to address this matter properly in Argentina before it's finally issued.
And if Argentina takes this step, do you think it will encourage others in the region to follow suit?
I think it's essential that Paraguay and Brazil follow these steps, and they do exactly the same. Yes.
Great. Audience, I invite your questions. Is there a mic? I think we have a question right here. Wait for the mic. Thank you. And could I ask you to keep your questions brief or short on time? And if you wouldn't mind, please introduce yourself. Thank you.
I'm Peter Humphrey, an intelligence analyst and a former diplomat. We have some capacity to actually empty bank accounts and even make them disappear. And I often wonder why we don't use that tool more often. In fact, every day. What I want to ask, though, is how strong are the Hawala networks that would allow these organizations to get around such an intelligence operation? And is a lot of this money moving through Hawala, some of it moving through Hawala, most of it moving through Hawala?
Thank you. Danny.
I think most Hezbollah-related money, not talking about the money from Iran, which comes in cash, to Lebanon. In terms of Hezbollah Inc., it moves through the financial system the way any other large multinational corporations' money moves through the international financial system. Sure, there are informal remittance networks that are associated with some of their activity, in particular, sort of the really more hardcore illegal activities. There's a certain I understand there's a certain mystique to the word Hawala. A Hawala is just a particular regional version of an informal remittance system, but an entity like Hezbollah is not going to be reliant on informal remittances. They're using the financial system. I'd be kind of curious about how you think that we could just empty out people's bank accounts, but that maybe we could talk about it afterwards, because I don't think it's quite as easy as that question implies. But
if I may just add, certainly where it pertains to Latin American operation, many of which are related to laundering money for criminal organizations in exchange for a commission, which then goes to finance Hezbollah. The bulk of the value moves through trade-based money laundering. And because it is designed to look like legitimate transactions, it goes through the financial system. There's a case that was recently adjudicated in Miami involving a Lebanese merchant based in Miami that was trading with the TBA through two partners who were cousins, one in Hong Kong, one in the TBA. He moved $155 million a year, for 3 years through his company's bank account, only $70 million declared. The vast majority was transactions through the bank account. Only a tiny amount was moved to Lebanon through Bitcoin, and small amounts were moved by cash. So the bulk is still, as Danny said, exploiting the formal financial system. And that's actually why they're vulnerable, because we have the tools to actually target them effectively.
And just to underscore, there is like sort of pure informal remittance that happens on a small scale, and we saw it like with Al Qaeda and groups. But to move any significant amount of money through an informal system, you're still going to need bank accounts. You're still going to need bank accounts. So the informal remitters, or in certain cases hwaladars, they have bank accounts. The money doesn't move magically. So the formal system is still absolutely vital for Hezbollah.
Other questions? Can you, there's a mic right behind you. Thank you. Thank you. And would you introduce yourself?
Yes, please. Thank you very much. My name is Camilla Bogdan. I'm Woodrow visiting fellow here at the Wilson Center, but I'm also a judge specializing in money laundering and expert of the European Commission back in Romania. So for me, it's very awkward from what you've described so far. Why don't you carry financial investigation in the domestic investigation, that in the domestic case in Argentina, in order to efficiently tackle the assets of Hezbollah? And from what you've mentioned, you have some allegation of severe politically exposed persons of corruption. You mentioned the person that is running from the vice president in Argentina. So you have also a very strong anti-corruption instrument that may be used in order to seize or going after a non-conviction-based confiscation. Should you be afraid that that your system, that your legal system is corrupt and may not be eager to handle the case, or if a trial cannot be opened? That is why I'm thinking, why don't you integrate the financial investigation in the case? Because 25 years, and if you mention that only the trade-based money laundering is being perpetrating, this is a very basic technique of money laundering. So they are really insulting your capacities of efficiently fighting them. They are not using any sophisticated typologies of money laundering in order to launder the money in Argentina. Thank you very much.
Either of you want to address it briefly?
I could just stress the last part, just to say trade-based money laundering is not a primitive form of money laundering. Some of the most sophisticated money laundering networks in the world are trade-based money laundering. The black market peso exchange is probably the #1 money laundering network in the world. That was the, Ambassador Sales didn't use the word black market peso exchange, but that's what he described perfectly when he was talking. This is a money laundering network that when I first came into government in the late 90s, I remember getting briefings on in the late 90s, and it still exists today. It's actually stronger, broader, and more sophisticated than it was, 25 years ago or more than 25 years ago. So and trade-based money laundering, again, it involves financial institutions. All of these transfers that are happening in trade-based money laundering need to be settled. And they're settled through financial institutions 90% of the time or more.
I think we have time for one quick question. Any other questions from the audience? Please.
Thanks. My name is Emmanuel Harley. I'm a communications intern for the Global Peace Foundation. And just a quick question about the Counterterrorism Ministerial in Buenos Aires. I was wondering if you guys were looking, what strategies would you use to bring more attention to this particular case and to get more traction going forward?
Yes, we're definitely looking forward for the ministerial. In fact, we are going to brief the assistants about the case, not so much about the case itself, but what we still need to improve the investigations, at what things are still pending, and in which fields Argentina might still need a lot of help from the other countries. So yes, we are waiting for that.
And Miguel, I'm actually going to ask you to close this portion for us. You've traveled the farthest. This is something that, I think it's safe to say we've all, looked at this issue. It's close to our hearts, but this is personal for you. Would you just close with a couple of remarks?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Toby. Well, I was thinking, Ambassador Sales, he surprised me because he mentioned by the name several of the victims, and I don't think it was by chance, but he mentioned young people, a little kid and 2 girls that were in their 20s. Then he also mentioned other victims. I would like to evoke Sebastián Barreiro's memory. He was a little boy walking by his mother's hand as every morning to kindergarten, and the bomb killed him. Rosa, his mother, survived, and she's still waiting for justice for his son. He was only 5 years old. He would be 30 now. Maybe he would be a father also. And I think his absurd death symbolizes what terrorism is in its most basic form, which is death, destruction, and annihilation of innocent lives. And there's no repair for such a loss. I've been in contact all these years with all the relatives, all the parents who lost their children, adults who lost their partners, people who lost friends, siblings, and there's no way to mitigate the pain or repair the damage. So the question is, what's to be done? What's left for all of us? And why so important to seek for truth and justice? And I've asked myself these questions many times all through these years, these mostly frustrating years. I don't have a definitive answer. But there's a teaching. I'm not very well versed in the Jewish tradition, all teachings, but I've learned of one that I think brings some light into this matter. It's written in the Ethics of the Fathers book. By virtue of three things does the world endure: truth, justice, and peace. So as we see, justice is in between. So the scholars have explained this is not casual. It's in between because justice feeds from truth in order to achieve peace. When truth is corrupted, you cannot get justice, and therefore you will not achieve peace. So that's why after 25 years, as I said, frustrating years and painful years, we are still doing this work. And as we all saw at the end of the video that opened the event, we want no less than the truth, and we demand nothing but justice. Meaning, we still need to fight against impunity, and we need trust and we need justice in order to one day achieve peace, which means no more innocent lives shall be killed by terrorist bombs. It's difficult, it's painful, but we still need to do it. I think we owe it to Sebastián Barreiro, to the 84 victims, to their parents, to their daughters and sons, to their siblings, to all the relatives, and even to the survivors, as we saw in the video as well, who survived the bombing, but for whom some part of them died that day, forever. And we also need to do it for the future generations. I'm glad to see many young faces here that show interest in this case that happened so far away 25 years ago, and that's rewarding for me. So we still need to do it for the future generations. And I think when I think about the future generations, I was 22 when I started. I'm 47. I became a father as well. So I see things differently now. And I think the challenge is double. We need to fight for justice and truth and seek demanding and keep doing it, but still preserving our values, still preserving our principles, and doing it while we still stand for the rule of law. And I think that's the most important message we can give today.
Thank you for your message, for your words. Thanks to our audience for your questions, and thanks to our panel for a very, very thoughtful discussion. I also want to add my thanks to Benjamin Gadan and all of his colleagues at the Wilson Center, FDD's cohorts of today's discussion. A special thanks to Aaron Blumenthal and my FDD colleagues for their hard work. If today has stimulated you to look at some of the source documents associated with the AMIA bombing, I mentioned briefly earlier that we've recently updated a lot of these documents to a website we put up after Alberto Niesman was murdered. The URL is albertoniesman.org. Our belief was that whoever killed him didn't just want to kill him, but they wanted to bury his work, his investigations, his findings. And so there's a wealth of information there for law enforcement, for the policy community, and for the media and others. And I'll just close with this thought. And it's just a reflection of what I said in the very beginning. Some may have asked what can be done to bring a measure of justice in this case 25 years after the attack. I get frustrated when I hear people say, we will never find out who did this, we will never hold people accountable. If this program today shows anything, it's that there are ways to bring justice, both for the victims of the AMIA and for just something that you said just now, Miguel, which is we have to fight against impunity. And so what our panelists did for me today was to show just how many tools there are in our toolkit, just how many options there are, so that the perpetrators of this are not left to their own devices and operating with impunity and acting with impunity. So there are so many things that can be done. There are myriad of things that can be done, and I would argue they should be done. It's up to all of us to ensure that that happens. Thank you all for joining us today.